The things that cured it were many things, really. I think getting to grips with it, just articulating it, which I did in the book to some degree. Um, Therapy, it's really, really good. Kind of understanding the causes, understanding the triggers. I don't call it OCD in the book, and I don't call it intrusive thoughts. I don't use the words like trauma actually to describe my own experience at all, because I think that kind of puts it in a mental health category. When Whereas the term executioner, I've always had this image in my head of an executioner, like someone who kills life. And then executioners are, they work for the justice system, you know. So within the world of the story, I wanted it to just be the executioner. But in my private life, I do recognize it's a mental health condition and I've treated it as such. So therapy's been very useful. Just things like, you know, running, like if you have anxiety, like doing exercise like 3, 4 times a week, getting enough sleep, making sure your diet isn't just like caffeine and sugar, you know, like I really, once I wrote the book, I went on a quite sort of deep 2 years or so of just like, I just got to look after myself, you know, like I've got to get my house in order. And I'm pleased to say I've had the opportunity to do that. And yeah, it's been a privilege to be able to get well.
There's one section in the book where you describe it, where it comes across to you in prison involving a mobile phone.
Mm,
I want to go into that because I imagine that would be a worrying time without going through what you're going through. But then that on top of that, that must have been horrendous. I mean, you were fortunate in one sense because it was the last 10 minutes of the lesson.
yeah.
So, although it must have been the longest 10 minutes of your life at that point.
Yeah, so you're not allowed mobile phones in prison. If you are found with a phone on you in prison, it can be a very serious offence. You know, it's a sackable offence in many prisons, and sometimes worse. You know, especially if you're believed to be um, selling them to prisoners or whatever. And when you go through security, you see faces of like ex-prison officers who were bringing in phones, drugs, tobacco, any kind of contraband to sell to prisoners. And I was kind of went through a period of being neurotically obsessed with making sure my phone wasn't in my pocket and putting it in a locker and like, you know, just like pressing it into my hand to make sure that like I could really feel it in my hand, that it was in my locker. And that's the thing about that kind of deeply irrational guilt OCD stuff, is it's immune to evidence, because there's always this like, what if you're just imagining this, what if. um and anyway, as is a kind of classic thing with OCD, you become so preoccupied with making the mistake that eventually you do make the mistake because your mind is all over the place.
Yeah.
And there's a moment in the book where I took a phone into prison and thankfully just walked out. um, but the walking out was a kind of reprieve in a way. It was a weird turning moment of like having done the thing that I really, really didn't want to do. I then did it, but that kind of became a small turning point in the desire to just leave that kind of madness behind.
What is, and you can probably answer this inside or outside of prison, but what is the purpose of philosophy? Obviously, with philosophy, you question a lot about the world, but just in general terms, I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, you get a philosophy degree and you use that to get some sort of job, because I know a lot of education is based around employment, been for like last 25 years. But just in general, like what is the purpose of philosophy in the outside world?
Yeah, I mean, people will say it's about the pursuit of truth. Uh, and, you know, part of living a good life or a virtuous life is having a kind of philosophical wisdom. There's so many answers, and there's kind of two ways I could answer it. One is as the kind of company man, you know, I'm Mr. Philosophy, and this is what philosophy can give you. Um, and there's kind of the personal kind of reason, you know, why am I so interested in this and why do I do this in prisons? I just think it's a really good way of getting to know someone.
Mm.
You know, if I say to you, you know, what do you think matters more in life, luck or choices? Like, why do you think we are where we are in our lives, or the rich people or poor people are where they are in their life because of luck or because of choices? You know, that's just going to be an interesting discussion. I'm probably going to learn a lot about you in that discussion. I'm probably going to reveal a lot about myself to you in that discussion, and it also gives people an opportunity to be complex, because I've got like 7 different answers to that question in my head. And um, you know, the thing about being in prison and the stigma of that and the shame of the kind of convict label is you're just one thing now. You're just a criminal, and a lot of things are interpreted through that. Oh well, he's a criminal. You know, you would think that, you would say that. And philosophy kind of gives you the right to be complex again. So I'm interested in it because I like having interesting conversations. I'm not sure if it gets us closer to the truth, philosophy. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Um, you know, so I wouldn't answer it as the company man. You know, I'd answer it as just kind of my own personal idiosyncratic use for it.
So one of the things you said there about choice and luck, and I think that's in the book as well, we discussed that. Has that made, when you've done a session like that with the prisoners, has that made the prisoners almost step back and think, oh, I don't really want to answer this? Because you talked about philosophy as a pursuit of truth. That is very truthful. Because if you said luck or choices, and they say, and they realize it's choices, for example, that's going to reveal a lot about themselves that they don't necessarily want to reveal. So how have prisoners responded to a session like that?
Um, that one, uh, I mean, I have a dialogue in the book between me and a prisoner, and I've kind of entered the debate, which I don't normally do in my classes, and I don't normally do in the book, but here I have, because luck is such a preoccupation of mine. You know, my brother went to prison 12 times, and I've only ever been in prison with a keychain on my belt. You know, we're so close, we're brothers, you know, we're kin, but there's this like wildly different outcome, and it's like, wow, you know, like I really feel the randomness of the universe so much sometimes.